Hi, I'm Erica Jednak. I'm the COO for Yes Every Kid, and I'm guest hosting today for the School Choice series sponsored by Jersey First TV. This series is a very special series where we are bringing in the experts, influencers in education to really touch on some of the hot topics going on in education freedom and school choice at large. And today we have a guest, Peter Murphy, who's the senior advisor for policy with investing in the Education Foundation. Peter, you have a very lengthy resume, over 25 years in the school choice and education freedom movement. Would love to hear just a little bit more about your organization and what you may be seeing right now across the country.
Well, thank you, Erica, very much for this opportunity to be on the Jersey First podcast. It's great to see you. And I've been involved with, as you mentioned, school choice issues for many years now, starting out with New York State's charter school law, which was passed way back in the late 1990s. And I worked in that area for quite a bit, where New York now has over 350 charter schools in operation, many of which came online after I moved on. But for the last decade or so, I've been involved with the Invest in Education Foundation and its C3 sister, the Coalition, where we are working in partnership with organizations across the country, national and state-based organizations, to make school choice available to every child in America who wants to access it, particularly low income, but also middle class families as well. So we're working in Congress specifically to get them familiar. Members, so much of lobbying is education, educating them, working with them and their staff, and hopefully getting legislation passed sooner rather than later.
Well, thank you, Peter. And maybe we can take a step back. What is school choice? What, this whole concept of education freedom, what does it mean to you?
Well, school choice, particularly with respect to K-12, is that every child should be able to go to the highest quality, most suitable school that their parents want for them. And most of public education is not so much educating the public as it is a system of circumscribed education around district operation. So public education is really narrowly defined as school district operated schools, where the children in those schools are typically assigned based on their residence. Where you live is where you go to school. There's some exceptions to that around the country and in pockets, even in the public system. But by and large, public education is, we feel, too circumscribed, too narrowly defined. And that really should be opened up so that parents, regardless of income, and this is the key, parents, regardless of income, can really access those schools that are, again, best conducive to their child's needs and education growth. So, if you have money in this country, like everything else, you can do more. You can get better education. You can go where you want. You can live where you want, almost. And for the top 1% or 2 or 5%, education is just fine because they can choose. They can access for their children. But school choice is really about opening that up. In effect, it's a very progressive approach to education, reaching all families to decide where they can best go, regardless of their zip code, regardless where they live.
Well, thank you, Peter. I've found it very interesting that this seems to be the only area of public life or public good that's determined by zip code and therefore income because of property taxes. Unlike public hospitals, public parks, libraries, right? You have all these
higher education,
yes.
Right? I mean, that's such a great point, Erica, because it is, there are these I'm not a lawyer, but if you look at the case law on this issue, it's been replete for the last 20 years. And the opponents of school choice harp on this bogus constitutional notion that somehow there's some violation of the Constitution here with respect to religion, since many private schools are religious based. But as you mentioned, private hospitals, many of them are religious based. Medicare pays whether you go to a secular or religious hospital. Housing vouchers are very common. People can choose where to live when they get subsidized government supported housing. I mean, it's on and on, except for K-12 education. That's like this exception to what is a quite normal thing, normal existence in the United States in terms of so many other areas of healthcare, of housing, of fire protection, police protection, on and on and on. And yet you have this peculiar and frankly selfish carve out that somehow K-12 should be exempt from what applies to every other sector that involves the government: higher ed, hospitals, healthcare, you name it. And we need to put an end to that.
Yes. And so, Peter, maybe you can walk through for the viewers here today, why is this important for families to be in the driver's seat for their kids' education? Like, what does that impact look like?
So, families to be in the driver's seat. So, in order to make school choice a reality, you really need to break up this kind of governmental monopoly that exists right now for 90 to 95% of the children in this country, and that is to allow families to access education beyond their assigned district school. And the way you do that, there's a number of ways to do that, but they can involve tax incentives. They can involve what's called education savings accounts, where instead of money going to fund the buildings and the faculty and everything at a given location, a school district, the money actually would go to the parents, who then can use it at the public school if that's where they want to send their child. And many of them do and will, or it could be used at some other school. So it's the parent being in control of the money just to fulfill their child's educational needs, not the government, in effect. The government's assigning that money. So the education savings account is an approach. That's a similar approach would be vouchers, where again it's money in the hands of families, using it for their education of their children. Scholarship tax credits is another way of generating private sector donations to scholarship funds, who then distribute them to families to use where they choose to go to school. But the bottom line is financially empowering families to choose the schooling for their children. That's really what it comes down to. So there's just multiple ways of doing that, but that's how you get there.
And Peter, you mentioned education scholarship accounts. You've mentioned a few different funding models. What are some of the developments across the country that you're seeing in different states?
Well, school choice has been around, if you will, in you'd have to go back over 30 years really to when charter schools laws started coming into place, where those are public schools, but they're schools of choice, where the government authorizes them, but they're contract schools that are not tied to a school district. So they're operated independently, and they are publicly accountable, but they generally have had more freedom from your traditional governmental mandates on education. So they've been around for going back almost 35 years to the early 90s. You have the voucher idea that was a Milton Friedman idea, famous economist. He first wrote about that in the mid 50s, in fact. So you've had voucher programs spring up starting in the late 90s, and then other forms, as we mentioned, scholarship tax credits and education savings accounts have really proliferated in recent years. But they go back a good 20 years, late 90s, early 2000s. And now you have more than half the states, 25, almost 30 states, depending on what constitutes school choice. If you look at private school choice, most states have charter school laws, all but maybe 5 or 6 of them. But if you look at the private school choice, which is what we're focused on at Invest in Ed, you've got about 30 states have programs of different shapes and sizes. And Arizona, Florida, Pennsylvania, they have some larger programs where a lot of children are eligible to access school choice opportunities. And most of the rest of the states have them at a much more modest level where several thousand kids can benefit. But we really want to see that open up more. So it's really taken off in the country, especially, Erica, during the pandemic when a lot of public schools were closed. Private schools, many of them by and large, stayed open. So that really got legislators' attention to open up more opportunities for private school choice, which we've seen in the last 2 years. But a lot more needs to be done. A lot of existing state programs are inadequate and don't serve enough children. And a lot of states, like my home state of New York and New Jersey and California, these big states, many of them just don't have any private school choice. Texas has no private school choice programming on the books. They have a charter school law, but they don't have anything beyond that. So there's enormous demand, enormous need, and that's what we're fighting for, so more kids can access this.
Well, amazing, Peter. And, we're also hearing rumblings at the federal level. And I'm sure, like many Americans right now following Congress, can be skeptical. What can Congress really be doing, particularly in this time of partisanship and, frankly, all of the COVID funding that we saw over the past couple years, just very wasteful. So, Peter, what are you hearing at the federal level, and do you see opportunities for positive change?
We really do, and that has been our focus because, as I mentioned earlier, many states' programs, while encouraging and helpful, are limited, and many other states have nothing. And so, when you have the politics that keep this from happening, when you have legislators and governors who are just doing the bidding of the teacher unions, and you're not going to see this opportunity open up. So it's really on Congress to kind of step in and fill this void, this educational void in so many of these states. And it's really, I would argue, historically comparable to the old Confederacy, where Southern states 2 generations ago were just overtly denying the civil rights of Americans, particularly Americans of color. And that was ended because Washington stepped in. And there were arguments that, Washington shouldn't interfere. It's a states' rights issue. Well, that's a historically nonsensical argument. It's been shown. And we think this is an analogous situation today where children are being held back educationally because of the politics of too many places in our nation. And so Congress needs to step in, and it can do so in a way that maintains education policy and governance with the states and localities, states and school districts. That's their responsibility in our federal system. But Washington, and specifically Congress and the executive branch, whoever occupies it, can step in and do this in a way using the federal tax code to generate private donations into scholarship funds. You could see $10 billion worth of scholarship money floating around for K-12. It would serve up to 2 million children. It would make every parent a potential customer. And that's the key. When a parent becomes a customer of education, or a potential one, what happens? They can shop somewhere else if they're not happy with their school district, if their school district is unresponsive, if there's books in the library that they object to and don't see removed, if the curriculum is not fulfilling their child's academic needs. That parent can be a customer based on legislation we're proposing in Congress, and take their schooling elsewhere and take their child elsewhere. That can bring enormous change. Even if your child doesn't get a scholarship ultimately, you're empowering parents in a way vis-a-vis their school districts that would be very, very positive for every child and public education writ large.
And Peter, what would you say for the viewers who are concerned about maybe federal funding strings, right? Mm-hmm. Or frankly, government involvement at all, right? Which can provide a lot of constraints when parents are looking for out of the box education models or alternatives.
That's a great question. And the upshot is that if the federal government is going to expand school choice in this country, it really has to do it in one way that ensures against the concern you raised about federal encroachment and using financial strings to start affecting schools' autonomy and independence and religious freedom in many cases. And so the design of the legislation that we're supporting, it's called the Educational Choice for Children Act. The design of that bill is using tax incentives so private individuals and private businesses make donations to K-12 scholarship funds, nonprofit funds, who then distribute scholarship money across the board to families who apply for them. Though that process exists now. I mean, you have scholarship funds that do this now, and you have about 20 states, 22, 21 states that have this type of approach. So we know it works. The states have been the laboratories that this works effectively. So this is now being tried nationally. And because it's not technically taxpayer federal money, it is private money because it's money that's never showing up to the federal treasury. It's staying with the donor who then who pays less tax and uses that lower tax liability to then make a donation. It's a tax incentive. It never shows up here. So it's never federal money. So the federal government has no financial ability to interfere with the autonomy of a public school or with a religious school, or excuse me, I said public school. The federal government has no financial entrance to a public schools, to a religious schools operations at all.
Well, thank you, Peter. And you have a lot of listeners today and viewers across the state of New Jersey. Are there resources where these viewers can go to learn more and even get involved?
Well, absolutely. So the Educational Choice for Children Act is spelled out on our website, investineducation.org. They can go to our website, and I would encourage everybody to not only learn more about this, but also contact your member of Congress. New Jersey has 12 members of the House of Representatives. Like every other state, they have 2 senators, and they should be contacted. And don't prejudge these people. Ultimately, voters have a lot more influence with members of Congress than they imagine. Washington, there's special interests. There's money and floating around all the time, and there's lots of that kinds of pressure. But ultimately, what I've seen is encouraging insofar as the members care most about their voters back home. They really, really do. And when they see that, as evidenced by phone calls and emails and pressure, they respond favorably in most cases. They really do. So it's our job to really work and partner with groups across the country, in New Jersey and elsewhere, and we're doing that to get ultimately individuals to make their views known, that they want education freedom, they want school choice for their child. And this is the quickest way, especially in a place like New Jersey, where Trenton and state legislators and Governor Phil Murphy, no relation, is just not responsive on this subject. They're just not, Jersey is a front and center example of why we need to do something from Washington to make this a reality.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Really, it's a pleasure to have you on. And thank you for all of the viewers at Jersey First TV for sponsoring this series on school choice. And we'll have more guests coming up. So thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Bye.